Well, some new developments in a mass murder that happened in Calaveras County back in 1985. The remains of some of the victims were exhumed for DNA testing last week. And as we see from KCRA3's Will Hereford, the Calaveras County Sheriff's Department has reopened the cold case of the Wilseyville murders to help give families of victims some resolution.
On a mountainside just outside of Wilseyville in eastern Calaveras County, Leonard Lake and his accomplice Charles Ng murdered victims from as far away as the Bay Area and neighbors just next door.
I was about 12 years old when this happened. I've heard many stories, living in this community. This obviously touched a lot of members of our community.
A KCRA crew was the first media escorted onto the site by then Sheriff Claude Ballard. There was a cinder block building that was described as a torture chamber. All around the property, investigators sifted shallow graves for bones, some fairly large and many just fragments. And this past weekend, investigators literally reopened the case by taking the top off of this crypt in a San Andreas cemetery and removing unidentified remains for advanced DNA identification.
We came across the Ng case, and due to the increase in technology for DNA, we thought we could give it a shot to see if we can maybe identify some of the victims that were in the crypt.
And some of the many pounds of bones found belonged to victim Paul Costner, according to his sister, who we spoke with from Ohio.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It is November 2nd, year 2025. And the time is 4:02 p.m. And today, as it's announced in the title, I'll be talking about the silence of the skulls. And for those who are not versed in Espanol or Spanish, skulls translates into Calaveras. And the area that we're going to be exploring of Northern California is Calaveras County, Skull County. And I'd say it's about 90 minutes or maybe 2 hours from where I am. It's about 3 hours from the city of San Francisco going east. All right, and that's an important point, as we'll get to in a moment, because the two principal characters who are responsible for this series of heinous crimes operated first in San Francisco, which most of you know by now is MK Ultra Central. We know, for example, that as part of MK Chaos, that the infamous Charles Manson would periodically travel up to San Francisco, the Bay Area, General Berkeley, in order to meet with his handler, who was a intern or a medical doctor, a resident in San Francisco proper, doing a study, quote unquote, at the free clinic in there. That's Charles Manson. Of course, we associate him with the so-called Tate LaBianca murders and more. Now we know that when we are looking at so-called serial killers, what we're really trying to figure out is who's behind these seemingly one-off acts of extreme violence. And invariably, we find that it's a combination of the U.S. military and maybe foreign military as well, and government agencies, all the way to the globalist NATO level, to our own Pentagon, and our civilian law enforcement agencies like the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as well as local, state law enforcement, right? So we're immediately, as in 2025, sophisticated enough to understand that we must think systemically where it comes to seemingly one-off events. And of course, the dominant as well as the indie media always tries to get us locked in on personalities, on individuals. so that we'll be going into a spin cycle of, well, here's another one. Well, they're Virginia Roberts Giuffre, and well, my gosh, here's another example of that. No, the co-author, Amy Wallace, and the surviving relatives of Virginia Roberts Giuffre are asking us to think of her situation as part of a larger system. Only then will we begin to have a chance, some semblance of an opportunity to circumvent what is at bottom a systematic attempt of human enslavement, abuse, and sometimes including the most horrific forms of punishment that can be visited upon a fellow human being or animals for that matter. And for that purpose, I returned, and I said returned because I've been at this for decades now. I'm returning to a book that I came across many years ago. It's called Die For Me. It's by a guy named Don Lasseter. He's an excellent author. I tried to find interviews of Don Lasseter, if they might be floating around on TubeView, but I was unable to find anything. So if any of you have some old VHS tapes or know Mr. Don Lasseter, please post them to TubeView so we can see what he looks like and how he conducts himself. But he's one of the many original true crime people who have been kind of pushed aside by all the pop-up pundits who typically weren't even alive when this was going down. This is what I'm talking about, what I'm alluding to when I said the resurrection of historical memory. There's a process, and it's a concerted effort to kill historical memory and make it, keep it buried. But as we saw by this cold open here, we have dead men or bodies, evidence, forensic evidence that are speaking from beyond the grave. This recent discovery of a victim of Charles Ng and Leonard Lake just happened this past year. And it's because of the recent advances in forensic science, specifically DNA related testing, that these cases are now being reopened and historical memory is being resurrected. Now, it's important for us not to even let these memories die. We cannot let the struggle, the sufferings of Virginia Giuffre Roberts or Roberts Giuffre just disappear and languish, right? We don't want to be kept on the back foot all the time, responding individually to all these different crimes as if they were one-offs. And by the way, as I've said before, you've heard me complain about this many, many times. And I want you to avoid this when you do your own research, because I know there are a lot of people who watch the Professor Hamamoto channel to get some ideas on new pathways for research. And I'm going to be introducing some today as well. Okay. Because I do not just rinse and repeat what's on TubeView by these pop-up pundits. I'm advancing the inquiry. And not only that, I'm widening it. And I've been doing it in earnest for the past, I'd say, month or two now, in talking specifically about horror films, scary movies, slasher films, right, that intersect with this horrific historical reality. They're inextricably connected. And I'm going to be talking about some of the perpetrators in the realm of pop entertainment who are part of this larger complex. And now, as I've complained many a time already, we have the whole true crime, hebristophilic genre that has flooded the zone. It has inundated us with inanity. Inundation of inanity. I like that. Write it down. And there's wacky women on the Nancy Grace Disgrace show, and the other one, she's the biggest offender. Megyn Kelly is thrown into the mix as well. But it's a female thing. It's a white middle class female wet panties sort of arousal that we're getting into here. There is a strong sexual component here. I don't mean to be gross or sensationalistic, but the facts speak to this truth that this preoccupation with true crime right now is highly gendered, and it's highly racialized, and it's highly class bound, social bound. And most of them fit the demographics of what we know today, laughingly, as Karens. These are all Karen types. This is their outlet. This is the way that they cope with their form of incel existence. There are no men around. All the testosterone has been drained from our glands. We have been emasculated. We men have been thrown into subordination. I'm not complaining necessarily, right? Because you can have the heart attacks. You can put yourself in the battle. You can look at all the tapes of abuse, kidnapping, torture, rape, and all that men at the FBI have to go through. The types of films that are so horrendous, tapes mostly, recordings, that they're still under lock and key right now. Do you really want to see that? All right. So I'm not didn't mean to go off on a tangent on Karens who are flooding in droves more and more to so-called true crime. Because the larger point that I want to examine and move towards solving, or at least mitigating severely, is that of violence against women. Not just everyday, quote unquote, symbolic violence, like, oh, you referred to me as she instead of they, right? The whole pronoun deal, which had its day in the sun, and it was mostly hairy-armed academic lesbian feminists who were pushing that one, and that eventually blew up in their faces. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the real systemic abuse, such as that has recently been, in more comprehensive fashion, recently been revisited by the release of the Virginia Roberts Giuffre memoirs. All right, and toward that end, by the way, I'll have a frequent guest here. She's been on more than a few times, Lena Pooh, to come in and talk about the memoirs of Virginia Roberts Giuffre. And she's going to be tying it into popular literature, more specifically that produced by, quote unquote, V.C. Andrews. She died a long time ago. I think she only wrote 4 of the Flowers in the Attics books. She died. She had lifelong health problems, but she definitely was clued in to women's struggles in American society and culture, at least, right? We're speaking of. And it was Lena Pooh that introduced me to the classic. When I say classic, I don't mean a big C like Penguin Classics or Oxford Classics. I'm talking about something that has entered into the mainstream of awareness. Flowers in the Attic. Because I was talking about these themes, and she said, you got to read V.C. Andrews. I said, after I read it, the first couple of installments, I think it goes up to 4. I said, yeah, we, the public, outside of my understanding, because of course, I'm not reading this type of literature. It's preteen girls who are now grown up and are now the primary audience for true crime, the hebristophilics. but they were first weaned on V.C. Andrews with all the incest, the murder, the rapes, the sexual violence, and in a domestic setting. All right. Anyway, I won't spoil it for Ms. Lena Poo's future appearance here. I also want to take this time to welcome in advance a return visit by one of my favorite and hopefully yours favorite authors, Mr. Leo Zagami. He has a new book out. You can find it yourself on Bezos.com. It's there. And it's called The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster. The artwork, of course, is incredible. It's sort of a composite graphic of our favorite Jeffrey Epstein and Frankenstein's monster. Remember, the monster himself, it was just called the monster. He's not called Frankenstein. That was the Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Is it any surprise that Jeffrey Epstein courted a lot of characters who were like Dr. Frankenstein or Frankenstein? Not a accident at all, because this tale goes back, my gosh, to biblical times. And Leo Zagami is going to talk about the whole metaphysical underpinnings of these crimes that leave us scratching our head. Do you understand that? We have to look at these events from a metaphysical, meta, above, or in addition to physical science, the spiritual, grappling with the questions of evil and versus good, talking about God, the gods of Abraham. And I say this because there's all this non-information that's pouring out, flooding the zone by all the tattooed wonders who are former, they're ex-Navy SEALs, ex-Special Forces, ex-CIA, and they are flooding the zone with their non-information. Oh, the bullet came in from the back. Oh, the trajectory has it that blah, 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 woof, woof. That's physical science. Yeah, to a certain extent, it's important, but their main function, psychological operations, because this is where most of these guys come from, right? I don't even have to call their names out. They're there. They're the ones that kind of sit back in their chair and they're very comfortable with everything that you already know, right? And don't put down I'm jealous. I'm not jealous of these characters. I'm just pointing out to you that they are part of the PSYOP. You understand? If we want to explain the deeper meaning of these seemingly unrelated events, whether it's an assassination up in Utah or an attempted assassination in Pennsylvania or 9/11 attacks or the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah building in Oklahoma City. If we want to understand that, we have to look at the metaphysical legacy that we've inherited. All right. And in keeping with today's theme, I wanted to stress to all of us here in the chat room and watching this on replay that wherever you live in the United States of America, in Canada, or any other country in the world, you have true crime right in your backyard. All right. So you don't have to look at Northern California, where I live, for all these wild and wacky, indescribably heinous crimes. You don't have to look for Charles Ng and Leonard Lake. You have them in your own backyard. And it's a normalized feature of American, or at least English language popular culture. Let me give you a specific example. Part of the inspiration of Leonard Lake, by the way, he was a U.S. Marine Corps veteran. He served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam during the so-called Vietnam War, the war that the Vietnamese people called the War Against American Imperial Aggression. That war, not 1 tour, but 2 tours before he was diagnosed as schizophrenic and mustered out of the Corps in 1970. Now, I don't have any evidence, but I suspect that Leonard Lake was what I call a broken arrow. He was trained, he was conditioned in the military, and then pushed back out into the general population to wreak horror and terror and chaos amongst we weak civilians. That's Leonard Lake and his partner in crime, Charles Chitat Ng, born in Hong Kong, came to the U.S. and Canada to escape supposedly an authoritarian upbringing. That was part of his defense, by the way. But he was really enacting something that he was trained to do in the U.S. Marine Corps. Yes, he was a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, like Leonard Lake. And the bulk of their crimes were situated in a little town that I visited. It's called Wilseyville, California. It's up in the Sierra Nevada, the great mountain range on the Pacific coast, going up and down the spine, almost all of it, of California into Oregon and Washington. That's the Sierra Nevada. And if you don't mind me telling a little personal story, I was driving up there late at night with a friend of this channel, and she was looking for a campsite where she was scheduled to give a talk. And I see the sign going by and it says Calaveras County, right? Skull County. That's the theme of today. And I started thinking, oh my gosh, this is where Leonard Lake and Charles Ng were doing their dirty deeds, kidnapping women and children and men, husbands, boyfriends, lovers, enslaving them up in Wilseyville and committing all sorts of horrific acts on them. I'm not going to specify what they are. So we were driving to Calaveras County, and then we were going on this dark, windy road late at night. And then there's a sign that says Wilseyville. And I go, my gosh, I remember that from reading the Don Lasseter book years and years ago. This encounter happened about 5-6 years ago. So I told my friend and colleague the whole story of Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. And she was doing the driving, and I could see her knuckles getting whiter and whiter and whiter. It's pitch black in there. And we were due to enter this campsite, which we did find in the dark, looking at the maps. And when we get there was nothing but heavy occult vibe taking place there. These New Agers, these Gaia worshipers, these Gnostics. And by the way, that's one of the primary demographic features of the true crime audience. A lot of Gnostics, a lot of quasi-nature worshipers and mystics and Gaia worshipers, and there's tons of them in Northern California. They established communes and voluntary communities, as it's called in the sociological literature, all around me. And if you live even in Western Pennsylvania, some rural areas, you are living amongst those people yourselves, and you don't even know it. If you were up in Idaho and you think you're safe, or you've moved to the Intermountain West up in Utah, you're surrounded by these individuals. It's all UVU, Utah Valley University, all over the place. Not only do retired, quote unquote, retired cops and sheriffs live there, there was even a guy down here in the Bay Area who was the chief of police who was commuting from, I think it was Provo, Utah or something. He'd take the plane from San Francisco International Airport every probably Thursday night and stayed at his little ranch up there and would commute during the week and sleep in the police station. That's how infiltrated it is with cops. And there's all sorts of these tattooed wonder special forces people out there too. And I'm surrounded by them. And by the way, I've been teaching this type of material in so-called Asian American studies. I taught it for about 21, 22 years because most of those techniques, those tactics, and the personnel, these mercenaries, the tattooed wonders, the special forces, the people like Leonard Lake, who earned his bones by killing gooks during the Vietnam War and then brutalizing the Vietnamese women's, that's where it was workshopped, ladies and gentlemen. So you think this is just the rantings of some yellow man who is pissed off that Steven Seagal gets the glory, or Joe Rogan calls himself a mixed martial artist, or the family down in Brazil's that calls itself, well, this is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? Let me go further. My friend and colleague, Lena Poo, has happened upon a literature that says that the yellow man was in what is now California, Western United States. The yellow man was here before European man. The white man, the Chinaman was, they didn't call us they were kingdoms there. I'm just using the modern terminology. And there's archaeological evidence of that. They were up in Calaveras County. And they were mingling and trading with the native populations. The native populations probably were partially Chinese themselves. Do you notice how Asian people, Indians look very Asian? Did that ever cross your mind? Because we're cousins. But it goes back, the timeline goes back way earlier than the European conquest, which you'll get to in a moment. But we're not taught that in school. Of course not. We're taught, John C. Freeman, General Freeman, he freed California from those horrible Mexicans. And they beat all the Indians like Captain Jack up in Modoc County, where I visited. There's a little museum dedicated to Captain Jack, the Modoc. These are called the Modoc Wars. And there are also incredible Indian and Chinese wars up in the Utah Territory. That's why there are no Indians. Well, they're in the reservation, but there are no red men walking around town, and there's no yellow men either. They were exterminated. And where do you think the term Calaveras, why the Spanish, quote unquote, explorers came in and called it, because they were finding all these skulls. And these were skulls of yellow people and Indians too, because this is gold rush territory we're talking about, mid-19th century. And all that land, all that property, all those resources was fought over these incredible battles. And why that's important here is that we have these serial killers running around and we're encircled by them who are an extension of that history. Do you understand that? It's in their blood. It's epigenetically part of their history. This is where the metaphysics come in. All right. So that's kind of a long-winded introduction to, let's get into some video of the hunt. It's called the Boneyard Killings, according to some true crime people. Some people call it the Wilseyville killers, whatever you want to call it. I call it Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. Let's take a look. Well, I'll leave it up to your imagination to infer what was found in this scarred by fire area. It's a burial ground, and they found enough bones numbering probably 30 or more human skeletons. That was not what they were charged for. I should just tell you at the beginning that Leonard Lake, as a survivalist, had always carried with himself on his person cyanide, so that if he was ever captured, he would kill himself before meeting his fate in prison. Charles Chitat Ng, spelled NG, by the way, managed to escape a lot of the charges, but he's still alive and he is serving a life sentence. I think it's San Quentin. I'm not sure the prison. That's not really super important, but the deal is that he is still alive and he still has a story to tell. I'd like to look at his notebooks, see what he's been writing, because he was an artist and a writer himself. I wouldn't say a fine writer, but he kept a diary, he kept a journal, just like Leonard Lake did itself. This, what I just showed you here, that clip, I think was a PBS document, one of the better ones. I'm telling you that because this whole case has tons and tons of supposed documentaries on Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. It's one of the more popular sensational stories that have been trivialized, which is part of the psychological operations. This one here uses that I just showed you has a minimum of recreation, has a lot of documentary footage. You check that yourself and you determine the veracity of it. So I tend to favor this one. Now, let me get into the reference, the collector. All right. And this is, again, a methodological contribution that I'm making to your own research. Study the popular movies, the television shows, the popular novels like Flowers in the Attic, whatever it might be. I just alluded to that. And films, novels, fiction. I mean, Leonard Lake, he's not an educated person. I don't think he ever went to school, so he's not going to come across books by John Fowles, like The Collector. Somehow he saw or found the book. The Collector was published in 1963. I looked it up, by John Fowles. He also wrote a book called the Magus or Magus. He also wrote The French Lieutenant's Wife or Woman. I can't remember. He's kind of like Ira Levin. Every one of his books have been translated to the silver screen, including The Collector, including The French Lieutenant's Woman, including the Magus or the Magus. So that tells me is that I do have The Collector. I'm rereading it. I even ordered a first edition just to make sure that they didn't change something between editions, they being the mystery publishers. But I'm going to investigate John Fowles a lot more closely, biographically. Does he come from intelligence? Is he MI? I suspect he might have a connection, just like Anthony Burgess, just like Ian Fleming, just like E. Howard Hunt, right? You remember his name from the Kennedy assassination. He was one of the three tramps, supposedly. E. Howard Hunt was also a mystery writer. These guys are men of letters, and the men of letters is not just CIA, FBI, but I'm talking about literature men of letters, because they're living this sort of James Bond fantasy life, which unfortunately is our reality So I think John Fowles is worth investigation. And just to get you a little bit more excited about your new area of interest, John Fowles, what a great name for a mystery. It's not a mystery. He verges into literary fiction. He's not a pop writer. He's not like the writer you find at the airport and you can read the book in 30 minutes while you're waiting for your flight. He's the type of writer that intellectuals, like educated people, he's the type of person that literature professors like to build careers on. That's John Fowles. But we don't have to wait for those so-called experts because they don't know anything about cultural forensics. They don't know anything about the New World Order. They don't respect the contributions of one professor, Daryl Y. Hamamoto, me. They just think I'm a joke because I'm not part of their club, the literary critical establishment. And by the way, you can tell that hurts my feelings, right? So let's take a look at the trailer for the film version of The Collector, which came out a mere 2 years after the publication of the novel, The Collector. That's kind of like Ira Levin. He published under his name. He might be a collective now, right? When I say Ira Levin, that could be a composite authorship. Like J.D. Salinger. We know all about J.D. Salinger now, the guy that wrote Catcher in the Rye. Supposedly, he was intelligence, OSS. You know, the information came out. So I think John Fowles, we're on to something here. But Rosemary's Baby, the movie, directed by guess who? Roman Polanski, of all people. That came out only 2 years later. So that means that the cultural engineers already had that in the production queue, right? And bits of the Charles Ng, Leonard Lake story have made its way into the popular Scream franchise, which I've been investigating lately, thanks to your Patreons, your patronage from the Patreon site. You can join me there if you want to find more. Excuse me for going off camera. But look I have, thanks to the Patreons, I'm going through the Friday the 13th franchise. There's 6 DVDs here. Friday the 13th. Freddy Krueger, the slasher. Here's the Scream 6 movie version, including the terrible remakes. This is Wes Craven, who we're going to talk about before we leave. I've been giving talks on Wes Craven and Roger Corman for the last few weeks. Do you see how I'm building into a larger understanding of Verstehen, rather than just repeating the facts of the crime like all these amateurs do on TubeView? Or Nancy Disgrace, or these other, Megan Kelly, whoever, they're just repeaters. We're getting into deep explanatory concepts here. This is what I call cultural forensics. So we got your Wes Craven, the Scream. I don't like to watch these movies myself, but I have to because they're currently being recycled for the new generation in the Vampire Diaries by this guy named Williamson. By the way, my supporters have asked me, why are you giving all this information away? Someone's going to take your ideas, your insights, your discoveries, and steal them. It's going to show up on the Candace Owens show. See, but the thing is, I'm a master chef. I can give you the ingredients. But no one except Professor Hamamoto knows how to combine those ingredients into a masterpiece of Verstehen. You get it? So I don't mind you throwing this in because I want you to come up with your own explanatory, your own conceptual version of what's going on here. We don't have to wait for the New York-based Condé Nast publications. We don't have to wait for the certified Vanity Fair sanitized version of Harvey Weinstein. We can do the stuff ourselves now. The barriers have almost been eliminated. All right, we're going to get into, let me just get this out of the way. Remember this talk I gave on Roger Corman? He's idolized by all the wonks in film school, at NYU Film School, UCLA, School of Cinema, Television, and Theater, which, as I will remind you, I taught there for a single year before they said, "Get out of here, yellow man," because I predicted the LA riots. Said, man, there's some heavy stuff going to come down. So we don't want you riling up our students. We want you to keep fostering the illusion that they're going to be able to break in to Hollywood and make incredible movies. And I said, sorry, I'm not going to feed into that illusion. I'm going to talk about the real gangsta Hollywood. This is at UCLA School of Film. And then you got your USC. They tried to compromise me there, the Annenberg School. They said, Professor Hamamoto, we wanted you to come in and we want you to queer all the movies featuring Asian American people. That's why I don't use the term anymore. And sure enough, all you see who have Asian males, yellow males, are all gay. From James Shigeta to Jason Scott Lee, who played Bruce Lee. Of course, they have to make him gay. All the way down the line. And the ones that they do put in there aren't even yellow. They're David Carradine. And once he woke up, guess what? He was strangled to death out in Thailand. And guess what he was investigating? Yes. He was investigating the Asian connection to what is a national and international system of control and violence. So Roger Corman, he's part of it. He liked to do movies in the third world, Asia, and the Philippines. Roger Corman, he wrote about it himself. Here's all the academic articles praising him to high heaven as making all these incredibly important schlocky films on a low budget and having discovered people's like Jack Nicholson, Joe Dante, all these actors and directors and writers that we know and love today. That's Roger Corman. Could it be that he was making these types of movies that Leonard Lake and Charles Ng were doing? Could it be? That's why I'm revisiting this book. Because I see the connections there and how it connects to Wes Craven as well. Let me do a quick excursus on Wes Craven. I've given an entire talk on him. I subsequently got this book. It's a good one. It's called The Soul of Wes Craven. And you might remember from previous talks that he went to I think it was a Baptist college. A lot of these individuals come from these fundamentalist church-related colleges. He went to Wheaton College. I don't know the denomination, so you can correct me here if it's important to your life that you know specifically, but it's Wheaton College. And according to this, he was expelled from school. Maybe he was having impure thoughts. But he was a man of letters. In fact, he even taught at the university level for a short time before going down to New York City to make porn movies. Gee, what a coincidence. Sex and violence. Before he got the call and went to LA to make the whole Screen franchise. Now, by his own account, Wes Craven was really disappointed with him with himself because he wanted to make art movies. He liked Ingmar Bergman. He liked all the art house films that I grew up as well on. We were very snobby about it. Right? We wouldn't lower ourselves to watch the pop schlocky stuff like Scream. I didn't watch that when it came out. I just rejected it. Only many, many years later did I start realizing, wow, this franchise has to be examined very, very closely. Same with Stephen King and all the other literary adaptations or adaptions to the screen. So yeah, he was teaching, and I think he came out of intelligence. You remember E. Howard Hunt? Most of these guys, they come out of the Ivy. E. Howard Hunt didn't specifically, but your original OSS type guys, CIA, you know the history. They all came from Yale. They're skull and bones people. You see the pattern, how it recurs? And another find that I have for you in the making of SNUFF, I'm not going to utter the word. And there's a whole literature, by the way, on the Terminator type films that are urban legends. And they've been obscured by academic critics, which I'll get to in a moment. This is what is not covered in the Die For Me book by Don Lasseter. Yes, they found all the photos. They found all these VHS tapes. But Lasseter did not understand that this was part of a commercial enterprise. The trade, the traffic in these still images and now videotape images of the most horrific footage that you could imagine. The so-called SNUFF film, right? That's what was going on. Maybe Lasseter or his publishers didn't want to go there, but I'm telling you now, after revisiting the book, because when I first read it, I didn't get it. Only after I learned more and more about what's going on and reading the history and reading between the lines, more importantly, that I put it together historically. That's why we're resurrecting the historical memory. Here on November 2nd, a couple days after Halloween, year 2025. And as I was gathering some of these show and tell books for you to present, I came across one that was under my chair. I'd forgotten about it, and I had read parts of it, and I even have some highlighting, some yellow fluorescent highlighting on this. This is by Thomas Harris. Here's another person that you researchers can profitably investigate. I'm giving you another ingredient. I pointed out John Fowles, Wes Craven, Roger Corman to look at it from a different perspective. But Thomas Harris, if you can find biographical information on him, you are on to something important. That's a contribution that I would like to read. So you go ahead and do it. Just like I couldn't find hardly anything. I mean, the public domain. So I could find a little bit on IR11. But someone on that level has journals. He has notebooks. He has papers that have been donated to some archive. So you can do the same with Thomas Harris. This is the book, the volume that introduced the famed character Hannibal Lecter. Most of you know the reference, Hannibal Lecter. You saw Silence of the Lambs, which was also a volume by Thomas Harris. But this is the first appearance of Dr. Hannibal Lecter, just like there was a Dr. Victor Frankenstein, just like there was a Dr. Marvin Minsky. Jeffrey Epstein liked to be around all these brainiacs because he knew these people were going to be the key to amassing intelligence power. So I want to know if Thomas Harris is connected to intelligence. I suspect that he worked in the psychiatric forensic science division of some intelligence operation, or he was a crime reporter because his books are full of detail such that can be gathered only in that type of setting. But he doesn't give interviews. So if you find information like this, you are making an important contribution. Now, the larger point I wanted to make is that this book, as I was looking at it again before coming on air with you today, I was saying, my gosh, this is a fictionalized version of what was going on in the Chamber of Horrors, constructed with his own hands and maintained by Leonard Lake and his Oriental assistant, Cato, aka Charles Ng. By the way, what got me into the whole scenario is that, wow, there's a yellow guy who's involved in a crime. He's Charles Ng. I got to check this out. Then I realized, oh my gosh, there's a huge story behind the Chinaman. So I started looking at this again and I said, how did Thomas Harris know this? I mean, the investigation and the prosecution didn't start until somewhere around 1985. So I said, well, Thomas Harris must have been following the case as it was reported in the Los Angeles Times, the San Francisco Chronicle, and my own Sacramento Bee. This is a huge case back in the mid-'80s. And of course, a couple of books, now two that I know of, book-length studies have been done, in addition to all the pop-up pundits, the exploitative hybristophilic voyeurs that are on TubeView, too many to count. So I said, Thomas Harris must have been familiar with this, just like the guy that wrote the script for Scream modeled his screenplay, St. Williamson, after the Gainesville Ripper. Gary, I can't remember his name. The book's right here. And there have been a couple of books on him written by the number one hybristophilic crime writer out there named Sandra London. She had a romantic relationship with this guy, the Gainesville Ripper. They even got married. All right. So when I'm talking about these Karen types who get involved with these criminals on a high level, I'm not exaggerating. I'm just describing a social fact. All right. And then that goes for Nancy Disgrace. Secretly, she's getting all excited with all these stories that she's reporting. All right, but let me finish up this story with Thomas Harris. So I said, surely he must have been inspired by the headlines and all the reportage by the Sacramento Bee. But guess what? I looked at the copyright. This book came out in 1981. It preceded the public awareness, the arrest of Leonard Lake and Charles Ng by a few years. But they talk about a guy with a camera who is documenting his sadomasochistic fantasies for his own consumption. There's no hint that he's part of a larger network where this is shared by a group of people, connoisseurs of the ultimate cinema, which is denied by academics to exist. It's supposed to be an urban legend. They call it satanic panic. See, the academic types are also contemptuous of literature, fiction, let alone analysis that I provide that has anything to do with Satanism or Luciferianism or the occult. They don't go there. They call it the satanic panic. They also say there was a panic over so-called SNUFF films. Just like there's a satanic panic over trafficking of human beings, those of the underage category, as well as adults. All right. So can you understand the struggles that I had in teaching this at the University of California, Davis? I'm giving away the whole underlying architectonics, the infrastructure of imperial control, post-imperial California control, globalist control. And I'm teaching it to young people that have the intellect to absorb what I'm saying, but who are being groomed for positions within that system. So you can see how treacherous this type of activity might be. All right. Let me just give you an example of one person who I came across recently. Thank you again, the Patreons that allow me to buy these resources. These are academic books. They're not cheap, right? The mass market literature, gosh, it goes for less than $10. I can handle that, but these academic books are expensive because they're supposed to go to libraries, and your average reader has no need for it, so they don't sell a lot of copies. That's why they go for premium. But that's my world, and that's why I'm sharing with you this one argument by a professor by the name of Lisa Downing, and the title is, this is chapter 12, and if there's interest here, indicate it on the comments or my Patreons if you're interested. I will make a PDF of this and I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you on the Patreon. Right. I share a lot of my research art material, not all of it. I hold back some of it for myself. Like, for example, I was able to identify the psychologist that Epstein was dealing with at MIT and Harvard. I gave up that information, but I did not give you the deep information of their research. That's the important ingredient there. So I'll give you, the wasabi or the shoyu or the salt and the pepper, but I'm not giving you the main. I'm holding back that information. All right. And I'm seeing that only, it's sort of like DYE for me. I'm seeing what's being borrowed from me and where it shows up. I'll maybe be able to trace it, but the big mojo is for me, and my own research, my own publications. I got to start writing again. I'm missing the true crime boat. It's a fad. It's going to pass, but I've been doing this not as a fad, but as a research area for years and years and years. And as you can tell, it's bearing fruit, because we're not going to go down this road any longer if we are to survive as a republic, as a free and sovereign republic. We cannot continue along this road, because it's us, it's you and me. We will be the ones who will wind up in the mass grave. In the 19th century, it was the Chinaman that was thrown into the mass unmarked graves by the founders, the settlers of the state of California. But it doesn't stop with the Chinamen. It's everybody. And they have different ways of disposing of us, down to the viral level. Okay, but anyway, here's an article. It's called Snuff and Nonsense. Subtitle, The Discursive Life of a Phantasmatic Archive. It's a phantasm. It doesn't exist. It's urban legend. It's part of the hysteria against porno in general. It's about homophobia. It's a pretext for the establishment to go in there and apply censorship to legitimate forms of expression. which I want to protect, by the way. I'm not saying that we should. Free expression is the core of freedom, right? So I understand where she's coming from, but Lisa Downing is oblivious to the fact that the phenomenon that she's supposedly so chic, so media study, so academically informed with all the greatest French, continental, European, German, post-Marxist, post-feminist literary theory and cultural studies. She's oblivious to the fact that this is real. And Leonard Lake and Charles Ng is the proof of concept amongst I'm just talking about one couple, one team. They're just one of many that are roaming the country. And they've been inserted in every, as I mentioned before, in every community in America. The more seemingly placid and safe, the more in jeopardy you are. So anyway, other than that, I have no problem with this essay. I'm just saying that these people are insulated from realities that either they are too lazy to try to grapple with, or they're too scared. It's probably the latter. And by the way, I did meet Lisa Downing at one point. I think it's the same person. She's queer herself. She's a self-identified lesbian, but she was of the lesbian sort that wasn't beating you over the head with lesbian power or transgenderism. She just was queer. That's cool. Very nice person. If I'm thinking the same person, this was years ago. This was when I was teaching at New York University. It was like 1999, 2000, something like that. I think she was teaching there. She was, as I recall, undergoing some sort of problem with tenure. Right. And that's, apparently she's I don't know where she teaches now, but I was surprised to see her with an article here about how snuff films are a fantasy. Right. Let me take a quick moment to talk about another talk that we'll have here. And again, Lena Poo is studying this case here. We're talking about the crimes in my area, my neighborhood, just like you can start digging around in your neighborhood so we can get more data points. So I'm revisiting this book, which I taught at UC Davis way back in 2007, 2008. It's called Dark Alliance by Gary Webb. He was a reporter at the San Jose Mercury News, and they have a bureau in Sacramento, as does the LA Times and New York Times. All the major, not just California, but national and international papers have a working office there in the media center of the state of California, because California is a major player in global politics, not just regional. It's wealthy enough to be considered the fifth largest economy in the world. We hear that over and over again. And it's run by an oligarch named Gavin Newsom and that particular gang, the Pelosi, the Feinsteins, all those people that come out of San Francisco. That's Getty oil money. You know the story. So he wrote a series of articles exposing the whole 1980s Iran-Contra network, the reality that the CIA, in cooperation with local law enforcement, and probably the FBI looking the other way, they imported tons and tons and tons of cocaine from Latin America to fund the secret war that U.S. Congress correctly refused to allocate any money to it, so that Ollie North, remember him, the Central Intelligence Agency, this is all under Ronald Reagan. He probably didn't know what was going on, just like Trump probably doesn't know half of what's going on by his supposed intelligence and justice departments. So they sent all that billions, I don't know if it's billions, but let's just say conservatively millions of dollars to arms people, merchants, to fund these revolutions, in this case in Nicaragua. And aren't we, the United States, in our name, about to invade Venezuela? Venezuela is a very important drug hub as well. So we might be seeing Iran-Contra 2.0. But anyway, the point is that Gary Webb unlocked it. He didn't know what was going on. He was just a beat reporter, and he got in trouble. So he took a sabbatical, and he wrote a book, on an entire book that supplies, and it's excellent, supplies all the receipts. So he couldn't be shut up. So as a result, he was suicided, again, close to where I am, out in Carmichael, California. You know, talking about Wilseyville in the south, Carmichael out in the east, and any number of names. I mean, I could write a whole volume of true crime just in my own region. It's that pervasive. So we'll have Lena Poo talk about this. And it's very much related to her own history and the history of yellow people in general, who were the original targets of the drug wars. Do you remember Opium Wars 1 and 2? Britain against China, and how they managed to subvert that country through the Opium Wars, courtesy of the Baghdadi Jewish family, the Sassoons and the Kaduri, based in Shanghai, as I mentioned before. And you're going to be seeing more pieces on Kaduri and Sassoon on TubeView, because the ChatGPT is gathering all material and putting it out there, and you're going to have AI pieces to push Professor Hamamoto further down in the algorithmic rankings. That's how it works. So another yokel. I also should mention this this book that I found, because this is one of those communal type settings, the one out in Wilseyville, run by Leonard Lake and Charles Ng. And Northern California is full of them. In fact, that was one of the ways that Charles Ng and Leonard Lake were able to lure their victims to visit them out in the boonies, up in the hills of the Sierra Nevada. He said, come visit us in the countryside. We've got goats and animals, and we grow our own food. And they're living in San Francisco. They said, yeah, let's drive 3 miles out there and have some fun, do some hot tubbing, walk around in nature. And that's the last time their relatives hear from them. Right, that's Will. So that type of arrangement is plentiful even now in 2025 in Northern California. Those are where your Gaia worshipers are. Right, your hippie dippy type people, your Gnostics people, your Hindus, your Asian, your Oriental religionists. They're here. And that's where we were heading when we went through Wilseyville. By the way, we didn't stay there overnight because it was too spooky, too creepy, and they had non-stop satanic beat, electronic EDM, electronic dance music going on all night long. So we took off. And fortunately, we found, it was during a holiday weekend, I think, we found a room, guess where? At an Indian casino. First, they said they didn't have any space because it was, Labor Day or something like that. And I just talked them up, and the clerk said, yeah, we do. He looked around and said, yeah, I guess we do have a room for you. Because I think he thought I was native. That's one of the times where being a yellow person worked to my benefit. All right. So anyway, that's a long adventure, and as you might imagine, I have story upon story to share with you. I'm not going to bore you with all these little anecdotes, but with one exception, one more. So I found this book about communes and utopia in Northern California. That's what I'm talking about right now. So I checked it out, and guess what? I found an article, chapter 4. It's called "The Commune as Badlands as Autonomous Zone" by Jesse Drew. I know this character. He teaches at UC Davis. He's a nepotism baby, a rich kid who ran away from home and from some kind of arrangement, probably with intelligence, managed to finagle a doctorate degree out of University of Texas, Austin. Because he didn't do any residency. When you get a PhD, you have to be there on site because they don't want commuters like this guy to come in and grab a degree, pay for it. And I think that's what he did. He probably bought the degree, and it allowed him to have the necessary credentials to set up a media program at UC Davis, media production. So I went to go check it out under the guise that I was unhappy with so-called Asian American studies, and I wanted to move into that area and accept it. And I went into for an interview with the whole faculty there. And they were either GLBTQ or these Gaia worshipers. And I gave a 10-minute job talk before their regular faculty meeting just to see if they were interested in my work. And no sooner did I leave the room than I heard the meeting room erupt in laughter. They just thought it was so funny that I was talking about the New World Order. And this is before the lockdown. This is before all the various and sundry scandals that we know about hit the fan. Because I was way ahead of those assholes, and I was ahead of Jesse Drew. Because he's a plant anyway. He is just like in the industry, music industry, the film industry. They're called corporate plants. He is one. So when I'm telling you the story, I have confronted these people. And I'm not telling you the story to feel sorry for me. I was just baiting them to get a rise out of it, to get a reaction, to see where their heads are at. And when I first made the approach, I visited him in the office out in the art department because they all like to view themselves as creative, artistic. And supposedly he was doing some research on Bakersfield country music because he pretended he was a working class type gentleman, even though his parents were his family were filthy rich, San Francisco type bankers, that type. I haven't seen the documentary yet. I know more about country music than he will ever know. And I have hundreds of country tunes from the golden age of California country music, the 1950s, the Bakersfield sound, the Los Angeles sound, the Sacramento sound. I have them all committed to memory. Of course, it's not that difficult to memorize 3 chords, but you get the idea. I'm steeped in it. This guy's an amateur. He's a Nepo baby. So I went to his office because this goes into the whole idea of filming and VHS and the collector and having all the photos and blackmail and intimidation, extortion. When I made the approach, I visited him, Jesse Drew, he's going to hate it if he sees it. I hope he does see it. Because I still have spies there from UC Davis who watch my channel here. You're in good company, ladies and gentlemen. So I went to his office in the art annex, and I sat down just to have a little chat before I can, make a suggestion that I would like to work with them, right? And I saw he had a whole wall of bookcases that were chock full of VHS tapes. He would make Leonard Lake seem like a piker, so far as the numbers of videotapes. And guess what? The videotapes were of my community. Japanese Americans at their cultural and political events in San Francisco. He managed to archive all that as a quote unquote videographer. So I'm telling you this, if someone wants to videograph you or do a video biography or interview you, especially with a newspaper or an academic institution, think twice about that. Because what they're doing is gathering intel on you. So that's what he was doing. I just kept quiet. I said, oh, that's really interesting collection. What are you going to do with that? Are you going to make a movie, documentary? They went to all the cultural events, the music performances, dances, talks, whatever. I might be on there as well. Who knows? So that was the function of Jesse Drew, and he's a professor. So that's really good cover. All right. So that's West Eden. I'm telling you, I'm talking about people that I was surrounded with, crimes in my own backyard. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through some of the other scenarios. I'll also remind you of the talk I gave a review of this book by Seth Harp, The Fort Bragg Cartel, because what this does is to reaffirm my insight that the Leonard Lake Charles Ng operation out in Wilseyville was a military intelligence operation from the get-go. And I'm not talking just because they were U.S. Marine Corps veterans, but that's where they got the induction into these MK-type programs. And in the case of Charles Ng, they said that he had like dependent personality syndrome or something that a lot of Karen type people ascribe to yellow people like me. Obviously, I don't seem to fit the profile, do I? That's why YouTube says, no, you can't, you can only go so far. We're not going to let you go any higher than 66,000 subscriptions. You can beat the system, by the way, if you subscribe right at this moment. Right? They want people like Charles Ng, who's going to do the dirty work for the masses. Supposedly, he had a dependent personality syndrome. They use it in his defense. Whereas he was a mastermind. He was a criminal mastermind. And the point I'm making here is that this author recently, this came out in 2025, talked about how the trafficking of human beings, including murder of women primarily and children, and drugs and armament, guns, is systemic in the U.S. Army at Fort Bragg. He calls it the Fort Bragg cartel. And the idea of cartel connotes drug cartels. What do they involve? Human trafficking, huge amounts of money, arms trafficking, drugs, you name it. That's our U.S. military. Leonard Lake and Charles Ng were doing this back in the late 70s and 80s. They weren't caught up with until the mid 80s. All right, you got the point here? Are you beginning to form a picture? Are you beginning to understand why cultural forensics is much more important than all these repeaters on TubeU who just recite information that anybody can find? We have to go way beyond that, people, if we are ever to solve the problem. We have to think systemically and make all these linkages here. And you're going to do it too. You're going to start looking at Wes Craven in a different way. You're going to be looking at Roger Corman in a different way. You're going to be Thomas Harris is now going to be on your critical radar. Just like I put Ira Levin up there, right? Because we've heard enough about J.D. Salinger and the same name. We've heard about Vladimir Nabokov over and over again. They're not one-offs. They're noted examples of a system. So just keep coming up, follow the names, do your research, and share it with the public because we are making some positive strides here. Okay, let's see The Collector. I guess it's a promo for it. And by the way, I should tell you the Collector, the film version, was directed by one of the greats of the golden age of cinema, Hollywood cinema, William Wyler. And I didn't realize this. He directed Giant. He directed some classics, some American, some William Wyler. I didn't know that he was not American until much, much later. And I teach film, I teach film history, because they hid the fact that he was actually German born and probably a U.S. military intelligence, just as Heinz Kissinger was. You know Heinz Kissinger? You may know him as Henry Kissinger. Yeah. He came out of the same mold. William Wyler, who became a famous Hollywood director because one of his relatives was connected. In Germany, he was known as Willy Wyler, and he was part of the liberation of France, I believe. He went with the U.S. Army Signal Corps to film all these incredible battle scenes, along with people like John Ford. These incredible filmmakers. These are real directors who were battle tested and had machine gun rounds being shot at them and seeing incredible human atrocities. That was William Wyler under the most horrific conditions. So I wonder if he was handpicked as a result to direct this incredible film. I can recommend you buying this or finding it in some way and watching it, The Collector. And it stars, guess what? A fairly new actor to international cinema, but he's British, he's an Englishman, Terence Stamp. So you know me, I have to find everything I can written by Terence Stamp. This is his autobiography up to age 18. He's got a couple more volumes. He was starring, you're going to see here, in The Collector. He plays the role of a obscure clerk who's a butterfly collector as a hobby. And he's sort of like a Charles Ing Leonard Lake composite, as you'll see in a moment. You can see this is, he was very much influenced by, of all people, Dean Martin. And then when James Dean hit, he wanted to affect that American rebel look. This is him when he's about 18. This is his mom. She was afraid that he was going to be, they didn't use the term gay, a pansy. And the father was worried he was going to be, because he wanted to act, and he's a working class person. Our family, we don't do acting. That's for the pansies out there, for the velvet mafia. But thank goodness he stayed the course and studied cinema and stage act. Terence Stamp, I don't know if he's active, but he made movies until a very good advanced age, and he is good. So check him out, especially check out The Collector and read his memoirs. Here we go.
Time magazine calls him one of the most cunning, evil characters of modern fiction. From the bold and breathless international bestseller, The Collector, comes the suspenseful, disturbing drama of a strange progression. From thought to wish. From desire to obsession. From dream to nightmare.
How long are you going to keep me here?
I don't know. It depends.
On what? on my falling in love with you? Because if that's what you want, I'm going to be here until I die.
Terence Stamp creates a remarkable portrait of the hero-villain. Tender, brutal, tormented, dangerous. Lovely Samantha Egger brings a versatile talent to the role of the young girl victim. Innocent, carefree, seductive, apprehensive. William Wyler, Hollywood's most honored director, looks at the strange, subtle, shifting relationship of these young people with the uncompromising realism its dramatic story demands.
Would I be doing this if I were only pretending?
A film so shockingly special, it could only be told today.
In 1965, just for your point of reference, this is when the Beatles were just taking off. This was swinging London, sort of the inception of the youth culture. But again, this is the seminal inspiration for Leonard Lake. That's what he called, is an homage to the character in this film. She's an art student by the name of Miranda Gray, played by Samantha Egger. Leonard Lake called his program, modeled after this, he called it Project Samantha, as an homage. Ladies and gentlemen, I could go on with this discussion, but we're at the 90-minute mark. So I'm going to call it a day. Put your comments down here below, and I will be posting supplemental material on the Patreon. If you haven't already, please subscribe, give me a like, and join my Patreon group, where you can deepen your understanding of these incredible forces that are only being touched upon by the Tubu tribe. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. We'll see you again next Sunday, God willing. Peace.